Welcome to the disturbing story of the Mauerova family. Let me begin this story by letting you know right away. This story takes place in a town in the Czech Republic, and much of the story had to be translated from a foreign language. I've done my best to find the English versions, so please try to be understanding if I mispronounce some of the names or details of the story. But that shouldn't matter. I'm sure this story will shock you once you hear all of the details. Join me for a ride through the odd and mysterious here at Odd Mystery Stories. In the quiet town of Klara in the Czech Republic, a story unfolded that would shock the nation and leave scars that would never fully heal. The Mauerova family, who were seemingly ordinary on the surface, harbored secrets so dark and twisted that their eventual revelation felt more like a nightmare than a reality. It all began with Klara Mauerova, a mother of two young boys, whose descent into madness was orchestrated by the manipulative influence of her sister, Katarina, and the mysterious girl named Annika. But Annika wasn't who she appeared to be. As the layers of this case were peeled back, the world learned of a secretive cult, bizarre medical treatments prescribed by a so-called doctor, and unspeakable acts committed against innocent children. The discovery of a young boy, naked and shackled in a dark cellar, was just the tip of the iceberg. What followed was a tale of psychological manipulation, extreme child abuse, and a family torn apart by twisted beliefs and sinister influences. How could a mother be driven to commit such atrocities against her own children? What role did the shadowy figures in the background play? And who was the doctor whose instructions turned a happy, peaceful home into a house of horrors? As we delve into the chilling details of the Mauerova family case, prepare yourself for a journey into the darkest corners of the human psyche. A story so strange, so unbelievable, that it'll stay with you long after the final chapter ends. Klara Mauerova, aged 31, and her sister Katarina, aged 33, were deeply devoted to a belief that they were chosen to fulfill a divine mission. Living in the Czech Republic, they often spoke of their calling, convinced that they had a unique purpose in life, destined by God. Klara, who held a degree in pedagogy, the method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or a theoretical concept, was a mother to two young boys, Andre, who was aged 8, and Jacob, who was aged 9. Despite being abandoned by the boy's father due to her increasingly peculiar beliefs and behavior, Klara initially seemed as a caring and dedicated mother. She would often be seen playing with her sons, taking them on vacation, and even sending them to summer camps, ensuring they had a well-rounded childhood. Katarina, on the other hand, worked at a youth center called Paprasek, where she was well regarded in the community. However, everything began to change when a new child entered their lives, Annika. This was also around the time when the sisters became deeply involved with a cult known as the Grail movement. The members of this group believed that performing good deeds was a guaranteed ticket to heaven, but they also held the disturbing belief that they were free to commit any crime, convinced they would still be absolved. The arrival of Annika marked the beginning of a shift in Klara's behavior, leading down a dark path that no one could have anticipated. When Katarina came to visit Klara and her nephews, she brought along a 13-year-old girl named Annika, a Norwegian orphan. Katarina claimed she was looking after her after she found out she was on the run from a sex trafficking gang in Norway. Annika explained how she was severely sexually and physically abused by the gang members, which gained a lot of sympathy and concern from Klara. Annika also suffered from many illnesses, such as leukemia, kidney failure, and she was slowly going blind and deaf. She spent a large chunk of her time inside hospitals. Klara was described as very weak and gullible and easily manipulated. and she started to accept Annika into her own family and caring for her as if her own child. However, Katerina refused to let Klara take her to any of her hospital visits and would only let her communicate with Annika through the phone, where Klara was told that most of the time Annika was actually unconscious. During this time, Klara began getting strange text messages and emails from some mysterious doctor who claimed that he knew how to perfectly help treat and care for Annika and asked to meet with Klara in person to discuss it. They scheduled the time to meet, around midnight, inside of a car. Since it was so late and it was very dark out, it was hard to get a good look at the man's face. Nevertheless, she felt comfortable since he had all of Annika's medical records and he also showed her his diplomatic passport. This was enough information for Klara to accept this man as Annika's new and official doctor. Over a short period of time, the text and the emails Klara received from this doctor became more and more strange. He would tell her certain treatment plans that he believed would help Annika, such as telling Klara to rub her all over her body, especially in the crotch region for hours, claiming that it would make Annika feel very happy. In 2006, Klara started to pay less and less attention to her sons, and they were mainly looked after by their grandparents. This was also around the time where she started to think about adopting Annika. However, the doctor told Klara that it would be impossible for her to adopt due to how mean her sons Andre and Jacob were to Annika. When Klara asked the doctor what she should do, he suggested that she should, quote, cure the boy's evil spirits with very hard discipline, tough love, and physical punishments. She began to beat the boys for every little thing they did wrong, as if she was looking for literally anything or any reason to hurt them. She would beat them with her bare hands, wooden spoons, belts, and would even go so far as locking them up in small rooms and leaving them there overnight. In August of 2006, the doctor told Klara that these punishments weren't working, and they needed to try something else, something more effective, like shock therapy. She was instructed by the doctor to stop acting like their mother completely and take them to a small cottage in Ververska Bitiska, which was located in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, not near anyone else's homes. At the cottage, they met up with Katerina and a man who will later be revealed as Annika's brother, and two other people, Jan and Hannah, who Klara knew from the summer camp where she would bring her sons. This cottage is where life would change dramatically for these two innocent children, who obviously trusted their mother. Upon arrival at the cottage, the boys were immediately locked up inside of dog cages, where they were quite literally treated like animals the entire time. The cages were so small the boys couldn't stand up, and they could hardly move around at all. They were also forced to eat inside of the cages using dog bowls, and forced to use the bathroom inside of the cages as well, leaving them to sit in their own excrement. They were forbidden to talk to each other, to their mother, or to any other person who was there. Klara would dunk their heads in water for so long that the boys were afraid they were going to drown. While their heads were underwater, Katerina would hold their arms behind their backs so they couldn't fight off their mother. They were burnt with cigarettes, scratched with forks, sexually abused, beaten, and they were forced to fight each other and would often have their arms and legs tied up behind their backs. The others would also join in with their beatings and the burnings and would tie plastic bags around their heads until the boys nearly passed out. They cut some flesh off of Andre's buttocks and burned the area that had been cut with cigarettes. They then forced him to eat his own flesh. They enjoyed that so much, they began to take skin off of the other parts of both boys' bodies so they could eat it as well, and they made both boys eat their own skin. If the boys ever threw up, they were forced to eat that again too. They would also make sure that their mouths were taped shut so they weren't able to scream. Annika would make things worse by lying to the adults, telling them that the boys were still being mean to her because she knew that would get them hurt if they continued to bully her. The group also pretended to abuse Annika as well, so the boys wouldn't think it was only them. This torture went on for 8 days before returning back home. In September of 2006, Klara decided to move forward on the adoption of Annika again. There were a few complications in the process, but because the story was shared in a foreign language, I wasn't able to clearly understand and translate some of the details, but the adoption involved DNA that somehow the brother and or the doctor was able to help get aligned, so ultimately the adoption was approved. Shortly after the adoption went through, Klara decided to hand over her sons to Katerina so she could solely focus on taking care of Annika, and she felt like Annika had so many health problems and needed so much extra attention that she couldn't care for all 3 children for a while. In January of 2007, the boys and Katerina all moved back in with Klara, and that's when the abuse started up again. The boys were treated pretty much the exact same way they were back at the cottage, but this time they were kept in a cement cellar, where they had every second being recorded on a nanny cam kind of setup. Meanwhile, Annika was given her own bedroom, brightly lit up, lots of color, lots of toys, and she was happy. The boys remained locked up down in the damp, dark cellar for around a year. So one day, this man named Edward had just purchased a wireless baby monitor for his newborn son. As you may know, these nanny cams or baby monitors are not exactly the most sophisticated pieces of technology, and sometimes they pick up signals of someone else's cameras, especially if they are within range of the other signal. When he went to check on his newborn son, what he ended up seeing was almost something out of a horror movie. What he saw was a very young boy who was completely naked, with his arms and legs tied behind his back. He was very dirty and didn't look healthy, and he was eating off of the floor. There were even moments where a woman's hand would show up, feeding the boy what looked like his own vomit off of the floor. Edward was super freaked out and called the police immediately. The police went door to door to find out where this footage was coming from, and they eventually found Klara and her sons. Klara and Katerina were instantly arrested, and the 3 children were put into a home called Cloakneck. Shortly after they arrived, Annika ran away. Here is the first twist of this story. Annika was never really Annika at all. She was actually a 33-year-old woman named Barbora Skrylova. She had glandular disease that made her look a lot younger than she actually was, and could easily pass off as being a 13-year-old girl. There are even some reports that she had breast reduction surgery done so she could appear younger than her actual age. Barbora used this to her advantage and would often use the fact that she looked like a child to avoid charges being filed when she broke the law. She initially ran away to Denmark and then made her way to Oslo, Norway, where she began to impersonate a 13-year-old boy named Adam Fauna. He was then placed in an emergency youth center due to claims of being brutally abused by his father, but he ran away from there as well shortly after. Missing posters went up everywhere, and he was eventually found again, and this time was busted. Police figured out her real identity, and she was sent back to Norway as Barbora. Wait, and the plot gets even more strange. Remember that they spent 8 days in a cottage off the countryside? Everyone in that cottage was tied to a man named Joseph, who was the leader of the cult they were in. Joseph was also Barbora's father, and Klara's sister Katerina knew who Annika was the entire time and purposely played her sister because she knew how easy it would be to manipulate her. Joseph was also the mystery doctor that Klara met in the middle of the night in the dark car. You know, the one who provided all of the documents shown to Klara. so there never really was any doctor. And all of those texts and emails had come from Katerina and Babora's devices. Martin Fauna and his wife were also in on the same cult, and they used their son's identity to smuggle Babora into Denmark and then into Norway, as they knew she was already a fugitive at the time. As we come to the end of this harrowing story, our hearts are heavy with the knowledge of what Andrei and Jacob Mauerova endured. The scars left on their bodies and minds are a tragic testament to the unimaginable cruelty inflicted by those who should have protected them. These two boys, once innocent and full of life, were subjected to many months of relentless abuse, their childhoods shattered by the twisted beliefs and actions of the very people they trusted. Yet, as we reflect upon their suffering, we are left with the lingering sense of injustice. Klara Mauerova, the mother who allowed and even participated in these horrors, was sentenced to just 9 years in prison. Her sister, Katerina, who played a key role in the abuse, received 10 years. And perhaps the most disturbing of all, Barbara Skrylova, the woman who deceived and manipulated this family, was sentenced to a mere 5 years. The others who were also at the cottage got between 5 and 7 years, and everyone has since been paroled. They are all already out of prison for their crimes. For crimes so severe, sentences like these seem woefully inadequate. How can justice be truly served when those responsible for the deliberate destruction of innocent lives face such limited repercussions? The leniencies of these sentences only deepens the tragedy, leaving us to wonder, where is the justice for Andrei and Jacob? Thanks once again for watching my video. My name is Vince. Would you please consider supporting my channel by either buying me a cup of coffee at the link in the description below, or even treating yourself to some merchandise at my online shop. I truly appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this story, you might also enjoy the story of the Westerfield brothers. You will find the link to that video and story in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Thank you.